The browser war is over, and for the first time in more than a decade, Chrome is not the winner. I know that sentence sounds dramatic, but stick with me, because the data behind it is specific and verifiable. For years, Google Chrome held somewhere between 65 and 70% of the global desktop browser market. That number has been slipping since 2023, slipped harder in 2024, fell off a cliff in 2025, and as of the first quarter of 2026, according to analytics tracked by StatCounter and cross-verified by independent web measurement services, Chrome has dropped below 50% for the first time in more than a decade. What replaced the difference is not Edge, it is not Safari. It is a privacy-focused browser that, 3 years ago, most people had never heard of, and that this year became, for tens of millions of users, the new default. I want to tell you what happened, why it happened, and what it means for the next stage of the web. Let me start with a short history, because the browser war is actually a very old story, and the most recent chapter is not the first dramatic chapter. In the early 2000s, Internet Explorer ruled the web with about 90% market share. Internet Explorer's dominance was propped up by Windows, which shipped with it pre-installed, and by a decade of bundling decisions that made switching hard for non-technical users. Firefox, an independent browser built by the Mozilla Foundation on the ashes of Netscape, chipped away at that dominance starting in 2004. By 2010, Firefox had roughly 30% of the browser market and was still rising. Microsoft's response was slow, complacent, and ultimately failed. Then came Chrome. Google launched Chrome in 2008. It was fast, clean, standards compliant, and it did something nobody else was doing, which was syncing your browsing data seamlessly across every device you used. If you logged into Gmail on one computer and opened Chrome on another, your bookmarks, your open tabs, and your saved passwords followed you. For the average user, that was magic. Within 5 years, Chrome had overtaken both Firefox and Internet Explorer. By 2016, it was the undisputed king. Chrome's dominance was never purely about features. Google bundled Chrome with every Android device. Google promoted Chrome on the homepage of Google Search, which at the time was the most visited web property on Earth. Google paid third-party software makers to include Chrome installers in their installers, which is how Chrome ended up on millions of Windows machines that their users never consciously installed it on. And Google poured resources into Chrome's engineering, making it genuinely fast and genuinely feature-rich. The combination was unbeatable, unless something else changed the conversation entirely. That something else turned out to be privacy. Chrome's business model is, and has always been, data collection. Your browsing history, your search queries, your form autofill data, your location when you use Maps, your activity across every Google-owned website, including YouTube, Gmail, and Google Docs. All of that feeds into the advertising engine that generates the vast majority of Google's revenue. For a long time, most users either did not know, did not care, or decided the trade was acceptable. But the trade started to feel different starting around 2022 when a combination of factors changed the conversation. The first factor was scandals, Google's settlement with Arizona over location tracking, the class action lawsuits over incognito mode's surveillance, the revelations that Google was logging activity even when users had explicitly opted out. These scandals were reported in the mainstream press and landed with a specific kind of force because they suggested that Google had been lying, not just collecting. The second factor was the rise of AI. Large language models like ChatGPT, launched in late 2022, raised the stakes of data collection enormously. Users suddenly understood that everything they had ever typed into a search bar, every email they had ever written, every document they had ever stored in the cloud was potential training data. Google's position that it would be a good steward of that data became harder to trust when the financial incentive to use the data was growing every month. The third factor was the emergence of genuinely usable alternatives. This is the critical piece, because you cannot leave Chrome if there is nowhere to go. Firefox had been around, but had stagnated. Safari was limited to Apple devices. Edge was Chromium-based and offered no real escape from Google's rendering engine monopoly. What changed between 2022 and 2025 was the rise of Brave. Brave is a Chromium-based browser, which sounds like an immediate problem for a privacy pitch, because Chromium is the open-source engine Google maintains. But Brave did something clever. It stripped out the parts of Chromium that send data to Google. It ripped out the parts that phone home. It added, by default, an aggressive ad blocker and tracker blocker called Brave Shields, which works not by installing an extension, but by being built into the browser itself. It added a Tor browsing mode. It added a crypto-based reward system that users could ignore if they wanted. And it shipped all of this as a browser that looked and felt like Chrome, ran every website that Chrome ran, and was, in many benchmarks, measurably faster because it was not loading the ads and trackers that Chrome loaded by default. Brave's adoption curve was slow at first. By early 2023, it had about 50 million monthly active users, which sounds like a lot, but is a rounding error in the context of the global browser market. Firefox had that many. Edge had that many. In late 2025, according to Brave's own reported user numbers and cross-verified by third parties, Brave crossed 100 million monthly active users. In early 2026, according to the same data, it crossed 150 million. It is now, by any meaningful measure, one of the major browsers in the world, and the trajectory is still upward. Meanwhile, Firefox has had its own quiet renaissance. Mozilla, the nonprofit behind Firefox, spent the last 3 years aggressively repositioning the browser around privacy, launching Firefox Focus for mobile, overhauling its tracking protection, and leaning into its nonprofit status. As a meaningful differentiator from the for-profit incentives of Chrome and Edge, Firefox's market share has stopped declining and, in some regions, has started to grow again. In Europe, Firefox is now the number 2 browser on desktop, behind Chrome and ahead of Edge. That is a sentence I did not expect to write 5 years ago. What this all adds up to is a market that is, for the first time in a decade, not dominated by a single browser. Chrome is still the single largest player, but its share is below 50% and falling. Brave is growing. Firefox is stable and recovering. Safari is holding steady on Apple devices. Edge is stuck somewhere between 10 and 15%, depending on who you ask. The browser market is suddenly competitive again, and competition for users is almost always good news. So what does this mean practically for you if you are still on Chrome and wondering whether to move? The short answer is that Brave and Firefox are both ready. You can install either of them in about 2 minutes. Both import your bookmarks, passwords, and open tabs from Chrome automatically. Both have desktop and mobile versions that sync across devices. Both have extension ecosystems, though Brave uses Chrome's extensions since it is Chromium-based, while Firefox has its own extension store that is smaller, but still covers the major utilities. The main differences are philosophical. Brave is a for-profit company based in California with a founder, Brendan Eich, who has some publicly controversial views that some users have opinions about. The browser is technically excellent, very fast, and very private. It includes the optional crypto reward system, which many users ignore entirely. Firefox is run by the Mozilla Foundation, a non-profit with a more complicated funding situation, including a long-time financial relationship with Google, that pays for Google to be Firefox's default search engine. Some people find that relationship compromised, others find it pragmatic. Both perspectives have merit. For most users, the honest recommendation is to try both for a week and see which one fits your workflow. Both are genuine improvements over Chrome in privacy terms. Both are meaningfully better in battery life on laptops because they load fewer ads and fewer trackers. Both are faster on the kind of cluttered modern websites that dominate the web because Brave Shields and Firefox's enhanced tracking protection are blocking megabytes of content you were downloading whether you wanted to or not. Now, the hard part. Leaving Chrome is not just a technical decision. It is a habit break. Chrome has been the default for most people for so long that the muscle memory is hard to shake. Your saved passwords are in Chrome. Your bookmarks are in Chrome. Your browser sync account is a Google account. Google has spent 15 years building friction into the process of leaving. The friction is not insurmountable. It is just real. Plan for a week of small annoyances as you migrate your workflow. After that week, the new browser starts to feel like home. There is a broader point to draw from all of this, and I want to be careful with it. Nothing about the collapse of Chrome's dominance was inevitable. The dominance was built on defaults, on bundling, on network effects, on a decade of technical excellence. It was unwound by a combination of user frustration with privacy erosion, mainstream coverage of that frustration, and the emergence of meaningfully better alternatives. The users who started switching in 2022 were, at the time, considered fringe. They were right. The direction of the market proved them right. And if you are a user who feels like your concerns about privacy or about the defaults imposed on you are fringe right now, you are probably not fringe. You're probably just early. The way these shifts work in practice is that a small minority of users make a change, talk about it, recommend it to their less technical friends and family, and the change spreads. Chrome's dominance was the same. The fall of Chrome is the same process, working in the opposite direction. Each person who switches makes the next switch slightly easier, by answering questions, by producing video walkthroughs, by confirming that yes, everything still works, by making the alternatives feel normal. The next step, the step that is starting to happen already, is about where the web goes from here. If Chrome no longer has majority share, Google's ability to dictate web standards through Chrome's rendering engine is diminished. Proposed standards that the community has objected to, like Google's attempt to replace third-party cookies with a new tracking mechanism called the Privacy Sandbox, face more resistance when they do not ship to the majority of users automatically. Firefox and Safari have been pushed back on these standards for years. Brave, being Chromium-based, inherits some of Google's decisions, but has also been willing to strip them out when the community objects. The more browser diversity exists, the more open the web stays. For the first time in more than a decade, the browser you use is a meaningful choice again. It is not a cosmetic preference. It is a vote for the kind of web you want to see built over the next decade. And that matters. Subscribe if you want the deep dive on Brave Shield's configuration, which is coming up next, including the settings most users leave at the defaults, but the power users tune for maximum blocking. In the comments, let me know what browser you are using today, and whether you have thought about switching. I read these. I genuinely want to know, because the story of how Chrome lost the browser war is still being written, and the people watching this channel are, in a small but real way, part of writing it.